So, this is about the time that I came in, was when OS 1 launched and Urbit looked like this. And this was, to me, a really special moment because I had been following Urbit along for years and, always been enthusiastic about it, but had never seen anything concrete that I could do with it. And at this moment, you could actually do something with it. And I think, a lot of the people in this room all came to the ecosystem about this time and started really gelling as a community because this enabled us to do that. And, from a technical perspective, this represented the first real long-lived product that became useful, that became maintained over time, that didn't just get all of its data wiped mercilessly every few months. It really was a big shift in culture for Tacen. And that's about the time that I decided I really want to, come in here and do something with this community. The thing that really pushed me over the edge was when I tackled a grant. I was learning Hoon for the third time over the last 4 or 5 years. And I went into some channel. I forget which one it was. I think it was the Forge. And I wanted to build a calendar app. And I said, hey, does anyone want to work on this with me? And then 2 minutes later, someone reached out and said, yeah, I do. And that guy turned out to be amazing. He was a fresh master's grad from, I think it was Brown University. He had nothing to do all summer. He ended up just building out the calendar like a madman, and all I could do was really struggle to keep up and project manage. And it struck me that there was an immense amount of talent in the Urbit community that was just kind of untapped. And that's what ultimately kind of led me into the Urbit Foundation, which is really focused on getting the community gelled around building things with this piece of technology. All right. Now, the thing was, OS 1 did not really drive major adoption by most of today's standards. It became a community of low hundreds of people. It's still basically that, right? So, we're about 2 decades in, and Urbit hasn't really taken off. There's definitely a very niche, tight community of people that really support this thing, but we're not talking thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people like you are with a lot of other projects. Why is that? Well, from my perspective, this is kind of the state of things right about now. This is what it looks like, and what it's looked like over the last couple of years, is that there were kind of 4 big problems preventing Urbit from really going somewhere and exploding. Right? One was performance, and if you were around in 2020, you felt this every time a 2-day-long OTA went out and the entire network was down and half the network broke on the other side. That got resolved, thankfully. A whole host of other things had been resolved, virtue of the fact that people were actually using this thing on a daily basis and they had complaints. And that made its way back to the team and they started getting resolved. This year, we're going to see a whole host of other performance upgrades that make an absolutely immense difference. I'm not going to go into the details there because I'm going to repeat this line a lot. That's what you have to come to assembly for. But there's a bunch of things going on that are going to change the performance characteristics of Urbit on an infrastructure side that will make it really possible to build high-quality experiences. Okay, software distribution. When we came in, we were running a grants program. We were encouraging people to build applications. Only problem was that they could never actually finish their application because there was 0 way to actually get it into anyone's hands. So that was always kind of a bummer. The end of last year, software distribution shipped, and that all changed pretty wildly, right? I heard about 3 new apps on a phone call with my team just on Monday. This happens all the time, where you find out about all these new things that are happening and coming to light. Onboarding. This has probably been the most pervasive thing. How the heck do I get on Urbit? I can run port. God forbid you're not on Windows, because then you have major problems. Sometimes port works on other platforms. A lot of times it doesn't. Weird things happen. You have kind of this not so great characteristic of, well, now I can't actually access my computer like a server because it's running locally. So onboarding in the form of hosting has been something that's been talked about since fall of 2020. This year, it's actually coming together. There's at least 3 companies that are all focusing on this. One of them has something that is scalable up to a few thousand ships that they're already beginning to roll out. I think we're in for a very different world as far as onboarding, which I'll get into in a minute. And then finally, you need these really high quality experiences. You need to see something that looks on par with the state of the art on the rest of the web to really think like, oh, this is a platform that is capable of supporting the kinds of things that people are used to these days. So the thing I'm going to posit is that by assembly this year, all of these are going to be solved. I mean, this one already is. This is mostly solved. These two will, well, they will be issues of yesterday. So this is now redundant because we just got the whole rundown from Philip, but he circulated this memo earlier in the year that said, what's unique about Urbit in 2022 is that the list of things required to be a viable product stack is quite short. Each of these is doable to the barely viable level in months with little implementation risk. So like we're at a point when Urbit is no longer something that might succeed. It's no longer a thing where we have these major unanswered questions that stand in the way of it becoming something that can really see traction and adoption. That was not the case not that long ago. We still had big problems that we were struggling with, right? So from where I sit, like what I see coming out of Holium, of Terrell, of Talon, of Third Earth, of Chorus One, of Ukbar, of all of the different companies that are building things, I see adoption as something that's just obviously going to happen, right? And I think everybody else is going to know that in a few months. For now, you kind of have to take my word for it, but it's kind of a big deal. And the thing that I realized in preparing this talk is that I haven't really thought a whole lot about what happens after that. The entire history of this project has been focused on getting to a point where this thing like really works and stands a chance. But that's been such a big hurdle for such a long period of time that I don't think that the problem space of what happens when Urbit can become adopted by a large group of people is a reality. So I've kind of explored about 3 narratives that I think encapsulate what's going to happen. The kind of things that are next for this project in a world when it's really scaling up and people are jumping onto it. So, first one is that I think Urbit's going to become more or less invisible. And I threw Nealer in there because there's some parts of Urbit that kind of leak up to the surface level. But by and large, it will be possible to use Urbit without knowing that you're using Urbit. Right? This is something that we mentioned, I've talked about with people at various times over the years, but it always felt like something that was really far off. Like it would be a really long time before people were just using products built on Urbit and they had no clue that they were using something powered by Urbit. I don't actually think that anymore. And I don't know, has anyone ever been asked this question? Like by some, family member, friend, even a technical person, and you're like, well, it's a clean slate operating system built from scratch, throws out all the technology since the 1970s, it's peer-to-peer, it's deterministic, it's a pure function of its entire state, and you start raving like a madman, and they're lost, and they never want to hear about Urbit again. It's like a dreaded question for, I think, a lot of people. And the thing is that Urbit is a piece of technology, right? Depending on who you're talking to, you shouldn't be asked this question, right? What is Urbit? Just like, someone that is using the internet doesn't really ask what is the internet, they just use it. Right? You don't really ask how does this work, what is the stack like, how does TCP IP work when you're getting into TikTok. Right? It's actually not necessary because the thing stands on its own. The products that you can use do not demand an understanding of how the thing works on an underlying level. Right? There are people that do want to know how it works, like all of you, but not everyone is going to be explained to how this works, and not everyone really should have to ask those kinds of questions or even really care. So I think by the end of this year, probably in a couple months, you'll be able to do this. You can download an app. It's not called Urbit. It's called something totally different. And it asks you to either sign up or sign in with your Urbit ID. This is that nearly part, right? And you might go like, I have no idea what an Urbit ID is, so I'm going to sign up. And then you do, and then you use the product. And then that's what you're doing. You're using whatever that product was. right? The pitch is for the product. It's for the thing that someone actually built that solves some problem for you and provides some novel use case. And then you can just use it, and you don't actually really have to worry about what is actually making this experience work. That's coming. And this is a really big deal because if you're a developer and you're trying to think about like, oh, I have got this perfect use case that I could build on Urbit, but how am I ever going to get people onto this because I have to deal with Urbit's onboarding pipeline problem of everyone needs to know how Urbit works and then run their own ship? You're like, well, obviously this isn't viable for me because I'm never going to be able to get anyone to use the thing. If you're a community, you're like, wow, this would be a really great thing for me to use to organize my community. How do I get people onto it? Well, the answer today is like, well, they just all have to run port except for the group host who needs to run it in a DigitalOcean droplet that they set up themselves and then maintain it over time. And you're like, it's easy, right? So like when this happens and you see the first example of this from the outside world, and you're like, oh wait, this is powered by Urbit. You're like, holy shit. Like I can actually build I can actually use this to build something that is really decentralized and has all the characteristics that Urbit has been shilling for years without having to subject someone to the terror and pain of booting Urbit themselves. Right? Unless they want to. You can always still do that, but you don't want everyone to have to do this. So, I think what we're starting to do at the Urbit Foundation is orient ourselves towards pitching Urbit to developers, because that's kind of how it should be. Urbit is a technical pitch to people that are going to use it as a substrate for building a product. You shouldn't be having to explain Urbit to end users at all, unless they want to, right? Which, these things will probably drive that. So I think, network adoption will be predominantly driven on a large scale by the use of products that really just stand on their own 2 feet, right? Okay, another completely separate thing. What I call the Digital Diaspora. Maybe other people have used this term too. It's probably not original, but I think it captures an idea well. So, I think we're in the midst of moving from a world in which everyone's on these mega networks, what this guy calls super networks, to much smaller, more insular, like micro networks is a pretty good word for it, right? You see this with Discord and with DAOs, with group chats, with other internet's piece on squad wealth, on the idea that people are moving off of the global public town square, off of the Facebook, where their parents are watching everything they do, and moving on to a small network with their friends where they do most of their online interaction. And you probably have a lot of these overlapping, right? So the digital diaspora, what I think is really this idea that people are going to move off of these big centralized platforms. But they have a problem, which is sort of captured here. This is Ivan Illich from Tools for Conviviality. People need not only to obtain things, they need above all the freedom to make things among which they can live, or give shape to them according to their own tastes, and to put them to use in caring for and about others. Right? So in other words, you need to be able to make your own tools and your own means for communication with people. Set your own terms of communication. Because in many ways, that's sort of the basis of culture, right? Is how you communicate with other people and what customs you have. Right? But if everyone is just shoehorned into IRC for work or IRC for gamers or DAOs or whatever, these products that are designed to appeal to the largest common denominator, you kind of have these big monocultures, right? And you can't extend these things. You don't own them in any meaningful way. You can't build new things into them. Why is that? Why can't you build these things? Okay, well, a lot of times when I'm preparing talks, I idly flip over to Hacker News. It's a habit that I haven't been able to shake after over a decade of doing this stuff. And today, this was on the front page of Hacker News, which you probably can't read, so let me read it to you. It's called The Bot Spam Apocalypse. Bots are absolutely crippling the internet ecosystem. The future in the film Terminator 2 is set in the 2020s. If you apply its predictions to the running of a website, it's honestly very accurate. Modern bot traffic is virtually indistinguishable from human traffic and pummel any self-hosted service into the ground, flood any form with comment spam, and is a chronic headache for almost any small-scale web service operator. They're a major part in killing off web forums and a significant wet blanket on any sort of fun internet creativity or experimentation. The only ones that can survive the robot apocalypse is large web services. Your Reddits, your Facebooks, Twitters, SaaS comment fields, and Discords. They have the economies of scale to develop viable countermeasures, to hire teams of people to work on the problem full time, and maybe at least keep up with the ever-evolving bots. Like, how perfect is that for a thing to appear today? And this is not the only kind of thing in this class of problems that make it all but impossible for you, an individual person, to build some tool that you want to deploy in production and use with your friends. Like, it's all but impossible because, okay, bots, that's one problem, a pretty big one. We've talked about DevOps. This was the subject of a lot of my presentation at Assembly last year, which you can go track down. Right, the complexity, the explosion of complexity in modern networked software development is absolutely a killer for anyone that wants to build a small tool. Right, you try and go and bring your idea to life over a weekend, and then you get to deployment, and you're like, this is never going to make it. I give up because it's just too much work. And that doesn't even get into maintenance. So you don't stand a chance at building any kind of tool for your own community. Contrast. This from the other day. Last night I stayed up till 3 a.m. playing with my Urbit and all the new apps. I spun up a moon with Houston, installed Faux on it to create a Discord bridge, and then edited Faux's code to add in my own features using Cliff. The dream is coming true. Indeed it is. Right, and I couldn't fit all of them on here, but there's a lot of apps out there, and people are just spinning these things up like crazy, and they all generally work fine. They don't go down because you run them. And the rate at which these things are popping up is just increasing. So something tells me by the numbers that this whole thesis is working, right? That people actually find it pretty straightforward to build applications on their own. And consider the fact that we didn't even have any coherent documentation for how to go about building your own application until like a month and a half ago. So it's kind of insane just how fast people are moving on this. And it's really only the insiders that know about this. So I don't think we're going to see a killer app, right? This is another thing that people mention to me a lot of times, like, what's Urbit's killer app? Like, wrong question. What's iOS's killer app? It's an ecosystem, right? It's not one thing. What we're going to see, the killer thing is a killer workflow, which is that developers can actually just build their own stuff trivially, right? Which can then evolve and take on a life of its own, right? We'll see an explosion of bespoke tools that are existing on a per community basis as people start their DAOs, they get their family group going, one person happens to be a developer and they're all like, yeah, let me build this thing over the course of a couple weeks, right? And then it just keeps growing. This is I think, kind of where we're going, as Balaji would call it, an unbundling from these mega platforms. And Urbit is really the only kind of thing that makes this possible for a network, right? Everything else just kind of sucks. Okay, so this last one, this is sort of the hot topic these days. Has anyone read this book yet? So Balaji's on my board, and I felt like it would be a good idea to leave an Amazon review, and so I thought I should probably read it first. So I'm glad I did, though, right? I read it. I've listened to like 20 hours of Balaji talking on Tim Ferriss and various other podcasts. And if you listen to this, or if you read this book, you're not really going to be pummeled with a whole lot of information you haven't heard, but you are going to hear it in a linear order rather than, like in a Balaji avalanche of words and tangents. So there won't be any popping up the stack or anything. So what I think is going to happen, as I was reading this, and he's going through and classifying the various stages of a network state, I kept thinking, like, this is the Urbit community. Like, these are the people I've been working with and what has made this such a special place to work within for so long. Right? They're all acting this out long before he started actually talking about this concept. All these things are happening. And so this is mostly going to be a summary of what I've learned, so I can include it in my Amazon review. Okay, so one of the things he distinguishes is there's a path to a network state very much as there's a path to a public company. Right? You don't set out to found a public company. You found a startup, and that proceeds through seed stage, Series A, Series B, so on ad infinitum, until you become public. Right? Similarly, This is roughly like a seed stage startup society. That's his expansion on the term startup that distinguishes a company from, or a network, a nascent network state from just a nascent public company, is this idea of the startup society. And those proceed through these stages, right? And I'll dig into that a little bit. So the startup society is this. It's a new society built internet first, premised on a moral critique of its parent community, founded for the purpose of addressing a specific social problem in an opt-in way. Okay? So what is Urbit's moral innovation? Like, what's our moral critique? I took a stab at coming up with this. I'm not super satisfied with it, but it's kind of okay. It's something like this, and some people take qualms with this word internet, but the internet stack is deficient, if not outright harmful, but with different fundamental design decisions, a better stack can be built. So to me, part of this is like, no, you can actually build a better stack. You can actually start over from scratch, and you can, flip the bird to the people that say you should never refactor, and you can do it to the entire computing stack. Like, that's possible. And you would do so making these totally different decisions, right? So I do think we have this fairly strong moral critique that I think just about everybody in the Urbit community, which is really not a monoculture by any stretch of the imagination anymore, right? Like, we have a pretty wide spectrum of people, from wet brain to tradcaths. They don't get along, but they do agree that the internet kind of sucks and we need something better, right? So here's a network union. A network union is a social graph organized in a tree-like structure with a leader, a purpose, a crypto-based financial and messaging system, and a daily call to action. It's the underpinning of the new nation behind a network state. It forms dense peer-to-peer connections, not simply leader to follower, and it acclimatizes its member to working together as a society towards a common purpose. So as I'm reading through this, I'm like, social graph in a tree-like structure, okay, yeah. It started with Twan, there's all these different companies. Now it looks a little bit more like a graph. We do have a leader, right? It tends to be Galen. For a while it was Curtis. It might still be Curtis, although he's not really affiliated with it anymore. We definitely have a purpose. We have a crypto-based financial system. We have address space. We have a messaging system. We also have our own network that we built that we can use to build any number of messaging systems. And we have a daily call to action to actually build this thing and use it to build new tools. I think this is fairly obvious, so I'll stop beating that horse. Another thing worth mentioning is when I think about the Urbit community, I'm not talking about, like everybody that uses any Urbit app as a narrative A is part of this. This is like the people that are really invested in the project. Now, I'm guessing that the vast majority of people in this room own an Urbit star, at least, right? I see all kinds of people here who have done multiple grants. So I know, and even if it's not owning address space, it's like being on the network all the time at a stage when it's not totally easy to do so, right? That community will always be much smaller relative to the ultimate growth trajectory of the project and the people that can use things built with it. But as that happens, okay, sorry, I forgot one slide. Let me come back to that. Network archipelago, this is an interesting one. A network union that begins acquiring and networking properties in the physical world. The physical interaction is key for building trust. Thank you, Jay.
There we are.
Right? This is not the only case. The Texans own Distribution Hall. They have this office space. They have this restaurant that we always enjoy eating in whenever we do an event in Austin. Right? We own land in Costa Rica that is open to, not by we, I mean a very generous person in the Urbit community who makes it available to lots of people. But we already started moving out into the physical world and crowdfunding physical spaces to begin bringing our community of people that are generally like-minded to. Right? So this is happening. And I do, disagree with Timlok Mitev. We do need physical interaction. Like, meeting together is not lame and worthless. Like, it actually is a key to building trust. Right? And I think anyone that has been to these various Urbit meetups that have been known for a long time as being of abnormally high quality every time we do them. Right? This is one of the things that make this community very special, is that we get together and we enjoy one another's company. And so, why does that matter? Why does this whole Urbit community becoming a network state actually matter? Well, Okay, if those other narratives come to pass, and Urbit is a serious basis for the future of networked communication, we own the network, and we now just inherited an immense amount of responsibility. This is not a toy. This is something that has to be treated as a very important piece of worldwide infrastructure, enabling people to communicate and associate with one another. So, we have to be tight. We have to care about the future of this project. Yeah. Okay, so in conclusion, I think it's, this is as much to me at the start of this talk as it is to all of you, is that I think it's time to start, to stop thinking about Urbit as a project with this future potential, right? That could be successful. It could be a new stack that might succeed. Like, no, it has succeeded. And that means that we're at a point where we kind of get to decide where we go. So please take part in figuring that out. Yeah, that's it. Questions? Yes.
Don't be shy. No dumb questions.
Jay.
So from Foundation's perspective, so there are grants that are out there. Do you want to highlight one or two of them that is most important to the Foundation?
Most important. So my perspective on grants is usually less that it is about a person building a thing than it is about a person having an opportunity to get involved and stay involved. So, and the usual route is that someone comes into the community like, I want to build this thing. And we look at it, we're like, that might work, probably won't. But you should build it. And then they take a stab at it. They go through a milestone or two, and then they realize, oh, this actually is maybe not the thing I really want to build, and they pivot course to something else. Or they get hired by some Urbit company, or they find some way to become more engaged. So I view grants, and that's not to say that grants are not an important thing, right? Like many things that people have produced have gone on to become like crucial pieces of infrastructure. Apprenticeships are particularly in this, and that they have people do actual infrastructure work, learn the kernel, and generally become kernel devs at some point. Amsden's WebRTC work, that got to a certain point that it was kind of usable. We tried to build a thing with it, didn't quite work. It went dormant for a long time, and now there's a guy who has revived it and is building full shared cursors with WebRTC and rooms that you can drop into as a group, audio, video. That's all coming together and will be ready by assembly. So sometimes these things have a very long, a long tail. Things I'm excited about right now, I'm really excited about Native Planet. It's just really cool, right? If anyone's not familiar with this, this is a hardware Urbit. That guy knows about it. He's talking about it, I believe. Let's see. What else am I really excited about? Q is a fun one that Malus Fabris is doing. We've been talking about the idea to store bookmarks and just have a way to better keep track of the thing. Like I'm always finding articles and going, I want to read that, let me keep that open in a tab, and then that one window grows to be like 10 things, and then eventually I shut my computer down and I lose them all, and I'm like, damn. That'll be nice. I'm very excited about all the infrastructure apprenticeships that are going on. There's more and more and more of those. We keep getting people coming in that are like, I want to work on the runtime. We're like, great, that needs a lot of work. We really need people that understand the runtime and want to write C, because a lot of people write Hoon and they really like it, but C is needed. That's kind of what I can think of off the top of my head, but what I have seen over the course of this year is that proposals have become much more thoughtful. Right? They're not quite as frequent, and the idea of, I don't know how much you know about our proposal system, but in order to get one through, you have to get an existing member of the community that has successfully completed a grant or has made some significant contribution to put their seal of approval on it and say, I will shepherd this through to completion. So it does make a high bar because you have to appeal to some unbeknownst member of the community. And people are getting hired like crazy. Generally, before people finish grants, they end up with jobs. That's that's kind of the standard these days. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, the open offer is that if you guys are building apps on Urbit and you're now moving past this grant stage and you're trying to build a company, contact us, contact me. Maybe there's a startup funding available for you. So we invested in Terrell, we invested in Oakbar, and we would love to invest in you. So yeah, get with me if you're building something interesting.